What's going on, everybody? Welcome into episode 140 of the MudWatch Sports Podcast on this Monday, February 9th, 2026. I'm your host, Zach Malum. But before we get started, please subscribe below. Follow all of my social accounts. Let's start things off in the world of basketball as the New York Knicks were in action this weekend. We start things on Friday evening as the Knicks went out to Detroit to take on the red-hot Detroit Pistons, and the Pistons win this one 118-80. The final, the Knicks fall to 33-19 on the year. Pistons move to 38-13 on the season at the top of the Eastern Conference, and they are 22-6 on their home floor now. The Knicks had a couple of guys out for this game, two impactful players in OG Anunoby as well as Karl Anthony Towns. OG Anunoby continues to deal with that toe injury, and you have Karl Anthony Towns dealing with the stitches that he got the other night in that bruising battle that they had against the Denver Nuggets where they won it in double overtime. But the Knicks come out with a loss in this one, and they got just absolutely crushed from start to finish. Detroit led this game for a long time, and it was all about shooting from the field. 35% the Knicks shot in this one versus the Pistons, who shot 53%. They hit 17 three-pointers, with the Knicks only hitting 8. And really, when you look at any game, it comes down to scoring the basketball. And the Knicks just did not do that in this game. And you got to give credit where credit is due as the Detroit Pistons continue to roll right now. And yes, a lot of Knicks fans will say, well, it's in Detroit. The Knicks have a lot of season left. They have to look towards the postseason, and you really can't take much from a regular season game. This game wasn't even close. I understand that the Knicks were missing a couple players, but what's going to happen if the Knicks do face Detroit in a playoff series? They have to go up to Detroit multiple times, and obviously if Detroit's the higher seed, really they get home court advantage for that series. So the Knicks are going to have to be able to win on the road. They are 12-13 after this game on the road this season, and we'll talk about how they changed that in just a little bit. But when you look at this season overall, the story of this Knicks team is they're really good at home, and when they get on the road, it's very shaky. And of course, the couple of games that they've had against the Detroit Pistons have not been kind to them. And even in the end, it wasn't even Cade Cunningham who was the story in this game. He only had 11 points, and that's really worrying for this Knicks team. There's a lot of depth on this Pistons side, and when Danis Jenkins coming off the bench scores 18 points because this game just wasn't close from start to finish, and Cade Cunningham only plays 22 minutes in the game, that's really a problem for this Knicks team. But they have to really bounce back, and they did so in great fashion. They went out to Boston yesterday on Super Bowl Sunday, a 12:30 start, and the Knicks absolutely torched the Celtics in this one, 111-89 on the road. And really, you give the Knicks full credit for how Jalen Brunson bounced back after a very tough game against Detroit, where he shot only 4 of 20 from the field, 0 of 8 from beyond the arc. And really, when you look at it, this Knicks team deserved to win this game on the road in Boston, as Jalen Brunson had 31 points in this one, 12 of 21 shooting from the field, 4 of 8 from beyond the arc. He also had 8 assists in this game, but they had the return of Karl Anthony Towns. Still no OG Anunoby in this game, so you really got to give the Knicks credit. Landry Shamet started the game for New York, and New York ends up really dominating Boston in this game. And really, when you look at the other side of things for the Boston Celtics, Derek White, Jaylen Brown were both in the game. Peyton Pritchard was coming off the bench for some really unknown reason in this one, and Nikola Vucevic as well was coming off the bench. And the Knicks still held the Celtics to 89 points. That's really a positive to take out of this game against Boston and bring it back to the Garden, where they take on the Pacers in a couple of days. But when you look at this game against the Boston Celtics, Jaylen Brown did his thing. 26 points, 11 of 25 shooting, just 0 of 4 from beyond the arc, though, and just 4 assists in the game, 33 minutes, and the Knicks really completed everything they wanted to do on the defensive side of the ball. Boston only shot 17% from beyond the arc in this game. Looks very similar to how the Knicks shot against the Pistons a couple days before that. But 37% Boston shot from the field in this game and 17% from beyond the arc. It wasn't like the Knicks shot out of this world in this game against the Celtics. 48% from the field, 40% from beyond the arc, but they did enough, like I said, on the defensive side of the ball, challenging some Boston three-pointers, and Boston really couldn't get anything going on the offensive end as they shot 7 of 41 from three-point land in this game. So the Knicks get a huge win on the road, and I talk about them going on the road to those tougher places if it comes to that during the postseason. They're going to have to play a couple games on the road wherever they go or whoever they face in a postseason series. 13-13 right now on the road this season. The Garden, when they get back there, they are absolutely stone cold in front of that home crowd. They are rock solid on their home floor, and they have to be better on the road. That's really what it comes down to for this Knicks team. That's the takeaways from this weekend. They end up taking a 111-89 win against the Boston Celtics on Super Bowl Sunday. But the Knicks are back in action tomorrow night. They host the Indiana Pacers at Madison Square Garden. It's a 7:30 start, and Indiana is just trying to stop the bleeding right now from what has been a horrendous season. Of course, their best player, Tyrese Halliburton, hurt in the playoffs last year, torn Achilles in the NBA Finals. And really, it's hurt them all season long, not having their star guy. 13-40 they are on the year, 3-22 on the road. So the Knicks should handle this one pretty easily. New York, I mentioned how great they've been on their home floor. 21-6. That's one of the best records in all of basketball on their home floor this season. So they have to just take it to the Indiana Pacers in this game. Probably going to be without a couple of guys. I think OG Anunoby being a game time decision, it's more likely that the Knicks should hold him out if he's not 100% healthy. They have to really figure that out. But if he can't go, they have plenty of guys who have really stepped up. Landry Shamet, all of a sudden being in the starting lineup for a couple of games, he's really been an impactful player off the bench. A lot of three-pointers up on the board for Shamet. And when he's shooting well, this Knicks team is playing well. So make sure you tune in tomorrow night, a 7:30 start as the Pacers take on the Knicks at Madison Square Garden. Thing in the world of basketball, but shifting things to the college game as number 22 St. John's hosted number 3 UConn in a barn burner at Madison Square Garden on Friday night. And the Johnnies pull off the upset against a top 5 opponent. They win it 81-72, a monster Big East win as they end UConn's stretch of 18 straight wins. A monster win for St. John's as well as they move to 11-1 in Big East play. 12-1 UConn is, and so they sit at the top of the Big East standings. And really, you got to give credit to how well St. John's played on the defensive side of the ball. I think that's really what it comes down to. They forced 15 turnovers in this game from the UConn Huskies, and 9 of them came from Silas Demery Jr., the top point guard in a lot of people's minds in all of Big East play. One of the top point guards in all of the nation. He led the Big East in assist-to-turnover ratio, led the Big East in assists per game coming in, and 9 turnovers in this game. Of the 15 turnovers that UConn had, having 9 of them for Silas Demery just really tells you that every single time he dribbled up the floor, right when he crossed half court, St. John's did a great job of pressuring him. They did a lot of great job of pickpocketing him right at the top of the key when he would least expect it. And give credit to St. John's. They had a game plan going in. You got to turn UConn over, and then you also have to do enough of a job to limit them from three-point land. They only had 9 three-pointers in this game, whereas St. John's, who is not a very good shooting team, they only had 5 three-pointers. They shot 26% from beyond the arc, St. John's, but they shot 50% overall. And UConn in a game where they shoot 55% from the field, 47% from beyond the arc. You're saying, how in the world did UConn lose this game? It really just came down to turnovers in the end, and St. John's ability to get to the free throw line. Yes, there was a huge disparity when it came to free throws in this game. 31 free throws for the Johnnies versus just 12 for UConn. And Dan Hurley had his complaints after the game. The UConn head coach did not agree with a lot of the calls by the referees, but in the end, St. John's was the better team on their day. I mean, they had the home crowd behind them, even though it stores south in a lot of people's minds in terms of the UConn world. But it was all St. John's fans in that arena, and they really made a lot of noise, made it difficult, made it a true road game, as Dan Hurley put it the other day. So a monster win for the Johnnies. Give credit to Rick Pitino for getting his guys ready for this game. It's a huge win for St. John's because of the Big East standings now, and it's just the two teams at the top, and these teams are going to meet in the month of February. Later this month, just a couple of weeks from now, they go up to Storrs and they take on the UConn Huskies in what should be a phenomenal game in a couple of weeks. And really, that's going to be the fight for the Big East regular season title. As long as St. John's continues to roll right now, which they are continuing to do so, continuing to win games, and they are racking up wins in a hurry after a very tough non-conference schedule. They have really stepped it up in Big East play. I think the win streak is up to 10 now. So what you're looking for from St. John's is your bigs to continue to roll. They've done a great job of getting Zuby Ejiofor involved every game, and the biggest impact player, in my opinion, has been Dylan Mitchell and what he's been able to do as a point forward, bringing up the ball. He's got plenty of ability to move the ball around, but set himself up to drive to the lane from the top of the key. Nobody is getting in his way once he gets downhill. And 7 of 9 shooting in this game from the field against UConn, 15 points in the game. That's a difference maker. The other difference maker, you got to give him credit, Dylan Darling, who had a very rough start to the season just based on his size, his experience. He wasn't a true Big East type of player because he was coming from Idaho State, a very different type of player where he was leading the Big Sky in points per game last season. And all of a sudden to switch that and come to Big East play at Madison Square Garden against some of the best teams in all of the nation, it's just not that easy. So he comes into this game on an absolute tear. He's really taken over in the last 5 minutes of games. The last 3, 4, 5 games, he's been terrific in the last 5 minutes, and he did so again. He hit a monster three-pointer that gave St. John's a little bit of cushion in this game. 21 minutes, 9 points, 3 of 4 shooting, 1 of 2 from beyond the arc. Had 1 rebound, 2 assists, as well as a huge steal against Silas Demery. So St. John's wins this game, a monster win against UConn at the Garden. The Johnnies are back in action tonight. They take on Xavier now at Madison Square Garden. It's a 6:30 start, and the Johnnies come into this game as 15.5-point favorites, total sitting at 160.5, and another edition of the Pitino Bowl. These teams faced off a couple of weeks ago, and boy, was it not easy for St. John's to go on the road, take on Xavier. It came down to the last couple of minutes of the game, and I mentioned it, Dylan Darling, a moment ago. He hit another huge three-pointer for St. John's in that win a couple of weeks ago against Xavier. Ruben Prey had a putback layup with just a couple seconds left on the clock, and St. John's, who rallied in that game from 16 down to take down Xavier on the road. They won that game 88-83. So it's not going to be easy going into tonight's game where St. John's has to really lock down Xavier. And I'm sure Richard Pitino will have a nice game plan against his father. I think the biggest story for St. John's heading into this game is not having a hangover after a phenomenal game, but the biggest game of their season against the UConn Huskies. All of the energy, all of the fight, all of the effort that they put out on the floor, they now have to, 2 days later, 3 days later, go up against a Xavier team that's just looking for a nice, solid win on the road. And that's what St. John's is going to have to really stop the hangover from a game in that UConn game where they really just dominated from start to finish against the Huskies. So give credit to St. John's for that win, but they have to really turn the page quickly as a Monday game after a Friday game. St. John's 15.5-point favorites tonight, 6:30 start as they host Xavier at MSG. And let's finish things off today in the world of baseball. There's not a lot of noise in terms of Mets camp, but they had a couple of moves, and the biggest one I do want to talk about. They signed MJ Melendez to a 1-year contract contract. And Melendez, who came off of the worst season of his career by far, spent most of his time down in the minors for the Royals last season after what he did in the majors, which was not pretty. 23 games. He was just 5 of 60 and a 0.83 average for MJ Melendez. A horrible season after a couple of seasons before that where you were seeing some improvement. I mean, a guy who was hitting 16, 17, 18 home runs in the last couple of seasons just completely stunk it up for the Royals a season ago. Like I said, he spent most of his time down in the minors for Kansas City, and in those games, 107 games, he batted .261, had 20 home runs, 64 RBI, so that's really what you're looking at, and the Mets are trying to really clean him up based on what they were seeing last season and just the struggles that he had with major league pitching. And then you bring that into, maybe you start him out in the minors. He does solid in the minors for this Mets team, but then all of a sudden he's a really solid utility guy that you can bring up, a guy who could be a good fielder for this Mets team this season. But after a horrible season with Kansas City in terms of his bat, it's going to be a long way back for a guy like MJ Melendez, who had just 1 home run last year in 23 games, just 5 hits in 60 at-bats. So we'll see what happens, but it's a good move, in my opinion, by David Stearns, a guy who you could bring to spring training, see what he's got. And obviously, this is a guy who just a couple of years ago, when Kansas City was in the playoffs, they were in the playoffs at Yankee Stadium. And this is a guy who ended up hitting a home run off of Garrett Cole in that series. And really, when you look at it, this is the guy who has a lot of talent and a guy who can hit in that big moment in the division series against the New York Yankees at Yankee Stadium. That's a guy that you're looking at and saying, yeah, he could be something for this Mets team if they end up improving him and get him going for this upcoming season. So a solid move, in my opinion, by David Stearns. Still some potential there for MJ Melendez, who gets called up to this Mets team. He gets signed by this Mets team in the end, and we'll see what happens as they move on towards spring training in just a couple of weeks. But that will do it for episode 140 of the MudWatch Sports Podcast. Please subscribe below. I've been Zach Malum, and thanks for watching, and talk to you all on Friday.